So, when I was younger, one show that I frequently watched was Total Drama. In fact, it's a show that I watched so frequently, to the point where, to be honest, I ended up quoting the show a lot. There would even be times where it actually ended up being something that I was hyperfixated with whenever a new season was ongoing. But when the season comes to an end, that hyperfixation would end up fizzling out for a while since the season was over, but when a new season would come out, I'd basically come back for it because of how good the show was. I wouldn't say that Total Drama is my favorite Canadian cartoon. I mean, Ed, Nettie and MLPFIM are the goats of good Canadian cartoons, but in a sea of tons of shows that makes the country's catalog of animation look bad, Total Drama always stood out to me for its unique plot structure, which is basically Survivor except it's animated, and its character dynamics, which always gave the show a suspenseful tone, where you don't know who's actually going to be eliminated next until you actually watch the next episode. The first 3 seasons, and Revenge of the Island by extension, are the show in its peak. Granted, season 2 had an issue where they padded things out because they didn't have enough characters to have them be eliminated in every episode, so a lot of the episodes just came across as being filler, and season 3 had the generic love triangle that is often the most hated aspect in any animated series, but the show has not been able to get up to the standards of these first few seasons since then, because the less said about All-Stars and Pockettail Island, the better. Though, at least the Redonkulous race was pretty good. So, what's the next logical step for this franchise that went through a bit of a downward spiral for a tiny bit, and then bounced back briefly? Oh, that's easy. Age the characters down, put them in a daycare, and turn the show into an episodic comedy. Wait, what? Yeah, today's subject is Total Dramarama. Say, you know those cartoons from the 1980s to the 2000s that age cartoon characters down, and they made an entire show about that? Well, let's bring that idea back, while also incorporating a lot of the bad aspects from the spin-offs / reboots that were coming out on Cartoon Network in the mid to late 2010s. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what went wrong is that this show is in the exact same category as a lot of these shows. Now, getting this out of the way, no, this show is not as bad as either Powerpuff Girls 2016 or Thundercats Roar, because in some respects, Total Dramarama does have sprinkles of highlights here and there, and of these 5 shows, Total Dramarama is probably the least offensive out of all of them. Though, I've only seen a few episodes of Ben 10 2017, and that show's problem is the art style being a turnoff, and for a show that wants to be cartoony, it feels way too restrained most of the time. Total Dramarama is not annoying, nor does it feel try-hard or have alarming content in it most of the time, but this show does have a specific set of problems that basically makes this Total Drama's equivalent to Teen Titans Go and those other reboots. The first of this show's problems is that there's mostly no purpose for this show to exist at all. Now, unlike Powerpuff Girls 2016, I can give this show some slack where it feels like it's trying to have its own identity, and the show doesn't feel like it's spitting all over the original, basically being in a similar vein as Teen Titans Go, where this show is obviously set in a different continuity, where the characters did meet each other at a younger age, even though this show in specific decides to reference modern technology and directly mentions the current decade that we're in, the 2020s, which is gonna date this show horribly. No, my problem instead is that the show is utterly pointless. What was the point of taking all of these characters and putting them in a daycare exactly? What is there to really do with these characters now that you basically age them back? Here's your answer. Absolutely nothing. You could literally replace all of the characters in this show with the cast of any other, and nothing would change at all. And that's been proven to have been the case as well. You remember Baby Looney Tunes? Well, that's exactly what Total Dramarama is like. It's almost eerie how similar that both of these two shows are. Both of them take the main cast of a specific franchise and age them down. Both of them have one of the franchise's iconic adults looking after them, and both of them strip the identity of the franchise that they're a part of in order to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And that's really saying something, because fun fact, Baby Looney Tunes actually turned me away from Looney Tunes for a while because of how much I remember not liking that show even when I was younger, because of how dull and boring it was. And to be honest, that's exactly how Dramarama is like as well, plus with the addition of Gross Out and the try-hard comedy of these 2010s Cartoon Network reboots. I honestly had to take back what I said about Camp Coral being the third most boring show that I reviewed so far, because as much as I really did not like that show for a lot of the same reasons as to why I don't like this show, Camp Coral, you can see the potential in a show like it working. The show's comedy fell flat, but they tried to do things. With Total Dramarama, aside from the novelty of it being an episodic kind of show, what else is there in this show to really justify its existence? It's like this show was done as an apology for the last few seasons of Total Drama due to how utterly massacred the characters were in All-Stars, and how the other characters got pushed to the side after World Tour, while at the exact same time, they had to find an excuse to make the weird stuff not feel out of place because of how much of a train wreck that Pocketail Island was. And while the apology is appreciated, them trying to incorporate these elements into the show doesn't mean that the show is automatically saved. This show has a lot of slapstick jokes where the characters get hurt by something, so this show seems to be trying to go for that approach. But the problem there is that the slapstick in this show falls flat because the show uses the exact same flash animation from the original series, and they didn't even bother to give the show an upgrade to fit the style that the show apparently wants to go for. And it shares a similar problem as Tom and Jerry Kids. Slapstick doesn't really work whenever the target of the slapstick is a child. I mean, it's funny when the character is an adult because their minds are more developed and they are more physically capable, but when it happens to a child, it makes it a lot more difficult to watch. And it also makes it more cruel when it happens to them than if it happens to a character like Squidward Tentacles. Seriously, watching Bridget being miserable while she has hiccups, all because she drank soda, while also being under the impression that her mother was gonna send her away is just cruel. Like, if it's karma because she drank pop, which is not allowed to be for kids at that specific age, it's not really deserved here because Bridget got permission from Chef to drink it. And not only that, Chef basically rushed her to drink the whole thing. And they also did her dirty in the last regular episode of the series, basically saying that she's just a background character, despite her appearance in the show's intro. And also, by that logic, characters like Lashana are background characters because she doesn't appear in every episode either. And the show often ignores a large amount of the main cast in every episode, not even giving them a non-speaking role, which ends up becoming incredibly noticeable because all of them appear in the show's intro. Also, this show seems to have a serious vendetta against Cody that gets to be excessive after a while, and the other characters seem to have a low opinion of him as well. If Powerpuff Girls 2016's joke that they ran into the ground was the characters getting the villain's name wrong, this show's joke that they run into the ground is its poor treatment of Cody, to the point where this show straight up states out loud that Cody is an alien from another planet, which is blatantly untrue. The audition tape for Island even proves that. So them blatantly saying that Cody is an alien out loud is just an excuse that the show has to dunk on him some more. Also, Cody barely has a reaction to anything that happens to him, like, at all, whereas in the original show, he has a wide range of emotions. And that's actually one of the show's biggest problems. Because this show basically decided to strip the franchise of its identity and dumbed it down so that they could make the show appeal to a younger audience, the characters either got hit hard and flanderized, or they just became generic archetypes. For example, Owen was the character that liked to eat in the original show, but the show gave him several other traits to balance things out, plus his relationship with Izzy and Noah gave him character development. But in this show, they just straight up made him the generic fat character that likes to eat stereotype with barely anything to make him stand out from the trope. And Duncan was a delinquent in the original show, but he also showed at many points in the series that he has a soft spot, regardless of whatever All-Stars was trying to make you believe about him. But this show turned him into a generic troublemaker, or basically just a knockoff Bart Simpson, and that's basically what they did with a lot of the other characters in this show too. Harold is the generic genius, Courtney is the generic control freak, Beth is basically a nose picker, Bridget is the generic nice girl, and Lashana is the generic sassy girl. Though a lot of these characters were already like this in the original show, except for Beth. I don't recall her doing a lot of what she did in this show in the original series. But some other characters are basically a lot more Flanderized than the other. For instance, what on earth did you guys do to Gwen? Yes, in the original show, she was what you could describe as the goth girl, but that was not all that her character was about. She displayed emotions such as sadness, happiness, had empathy for other people around her, etc. And bear in mind, all of that was when she was older. Gwen in this show is a lot younger, and she says a lot of things that are just out of pocket in this show. Her very first appearance in this show has her making a comment about how there are many Crane-related deaths, and I'm just thinking to myself, that is not Gwen at all. They also made her super obsessed with characters getting hurt now, which is just so un-Gwen-like to do, especially with her liking the fact that she was in small spaces, like her egg, despite the original show establishing that she has major claustrophobia. But believe it or not, Gwen is not even the character that they ruined the most. No, that goes to Chef. In the original show, Chef was admittedly underutilized in that he was just standing beside Chris for most of the show. Basically, take all of the problems that I had with Professor Utonium from Powerpuff Girls 2016 and apply those same problems to Chef. Chef went from being a menacing presence for the other characters to be around, to the point where he's actually scary whenever he gets mad, to an absolute idiot that breaks down very easily in every other episode. I can understand them not wanting Chef to be that harsh towards a bunch of toddlers because they are a bunch of toddlers, but the question is just unanswered. Why did they make Chef the daycare owner? Chris, I can understand them not making the daycare owner because he's just meant to be the host of the show and has done a ton of horrible stuff to the cast that I don't think that this man could even be legally able to take care of children. But like, you have other options that you could go with, like MacArthur, for example. She appears frequently throughout the show and even has a backstory where she's been fired from every job that she's been hired in, so this could have been what eventually got her job as the daycare teacher, because I really do not like what they did to Chef. He especially got intolerable in the finale special, where he directly enables Duncan's behavior throughout all 40 minutes of that special. And while MacArthur is an adult in this show, she absolutely didn't deserve to be ignored after she ended up accidentally breaking her back in an episode, and Chef really should have been more considerate towards her well-being, because she's the one who's been helping Chef whenever something goes wrong at the daycare. And much like Teen Titans Go, Powerpuff Girls 2016, Ben 10 2017, and Thundercats Roar, if you have no knowledge of who any of these characters are, you are gonna be totally lost, because the very first episode of this show does not introduce any of its characters to the audience, which is strange because they did that for Sugar and Lightning later on in the series, but I don't see the point in introducing them that late into the show, because both of them have existed long before this show even came into existence. And while Revenge of the Island was not the most beloved season of the show, the characters introduced there were memorable, and if I'm being honest, they probably should have added a few of them into this show before it even came out, like Mike, Zoe, Brick, Dawn, Sam, Dakota, and Cameron. Although, out of all characters that you could have introduced into this show, why Sugar exactly? Sugar was a character that was very hated in Pocketail Island. Heck, I didn't even like her when the show initially premiered. Not only was Sugar annoying, but she was basically just Owen, but without any of the likability whatsoever, and she's not any better in Dramarama. She legit tries to get her group put in danger during the 40-minute special, but as for the first portion of the series, if you jumped into even the first episode of the show, you will not know what's going on, or who the characters' names are. And considering the fact that this show came out in 2018, most kids around that time period would be too young to know what total drama is, and those that probably did know about its existence probably weren't even allowed to watch it because of how risky that the show often got, especially in the first season of the show. This show decides to throw us in, expecting us to know about them, and that's a major problem with turning a story-based show into an episodic comedy. And I could tell that this was probably Cartoon Network's doing, because that was a problem that plagued the original show. Certain characters were not allowed to stay in a relationship because it's not realistic or it's demographic to learn, which is what led to the infamous love triangle arc in World Tour. And a lot of the problems that this show has feels right at home in the era that the show was made in, along with TTG, PPG 2016, Ben 10 2017, and Thundercats Roar, complete with Flanderizing beloved characters and dumbing it down for its audience. But I think that the reason reason why this show doesn't get talked about that much in comparison to those other shows, because at its worst, the biggest problems that Total Dramarama has is that it's just forgettable, pointless, and boring at worst. With the exception of Total Eclipse of the Fart. That episode is just abysmal. Rule of thumb, don't make an episode that implies that a grown adult likes to go around and smell other people's farts, and don't emphasize the fact that he likes to smell the farts of children. That just opens up a whole can of worms to the point where this episode rivals the worst episodes of Powerpuff Girls 2016. The episode really is that bad, but aside from all of that, Total Dramarama is the least offensive out of all of these shows, because believe it or not, there are some positives I do have with it. I can definitely see why they'd want to make Total Drama into an episodic show, because whenever each season of the original series were to end, the hype would freeze for a little bit until the next season would come, and the characters were what made the original series as good as it was. And to be honest, there are some episodes that have this work in their favor. The episode where Duncan befriends a caveman was strangely wholesome, and weirdly enough, this is the first Total Drama thing ever that has a Christmas plotline. Also, I do think that it was for the best to have this show be in an alternate continuity, given that this show does get very weird, as opposed to the original show, which mostly had its things and animals act all realistic. It was also fun to spot all of the Easter eggs that were from the original show. Also, I like that they retained Owen and Noah's friendship from World Tour, and Izzy is as unhinged and hilarious as she was in the original. So the only people that I'd really recommend this show to are people who want a more episodic version of Total Drama. That is, if you can make it past the intro of this show. Yeah, that's another thing that I should point out. The theme song for this show is absolutely horrible. I don't usually talk about the theme song in a show that I'd review, unless I point out if it's catchy or is missing a lot of context explaining what the show is about, but this show is the one exception. Its theme song and background music are literally tied with the theme song and background music of the Tom and Jerry comedy show as some of the worst music in a show that I reviewed so far. I understand that I Want to Be Famous or some of the iconic music tracks from the original show were gonna be hard to match, but this show didn't even try. Who thought that it was a good idea to have most of your music tracks composed of children screeching at the top of their lungs and chanting in the background? Yes, I understand that the characters in this show are children going to a daycare, but a pup named Scooby-Doo didn't do this. Heck, Tom and Jerry Kids had a great theme song. Not even Baby Looney Tunes had this problem, as overly saccharine as that show's theme song was. This show starts off with the choir of shrieking children singing a song that literally sounds like circus music, and on top of that, showcasing literal nonsense, and then finally showcasing the title of the show. Though, between listening to a song that has off-key instruments and a song where children are shrieking at the top of their lungs, I honestly don't know which one is worse, to be honest. But needless to say, I wouldn't be surprised if the theme song and background music were enough to turn people away from this show entirely because of how annoying and ear-grating it is. And also, the special that was done months after the show ended was just terrible, with a very convoluted plot, a story that was entirely pointless because Duncan made the water park disappear, Chef being at his absolute worst, and Duncan in this is entirely reminiscent to how he was in All Stars, being completely insecure about being called the nice guy until he does something bad to prove that he's not a hero. So overall, Total Dramarama is pretty bad. I don't think that this show is like top 5 material. Heck, I don't know if this show would even make the top 10. Even All Stars and Pocketail Island are worse than a majority of this show because of the character derailment and jumping the shark regarding the show's down-to-earth elements. But being better than something that is worse doesn't mean that it's good. And that's exactly how I feel towards Dramarama. The show is boring, the characters have been reduced to generic archetypes, it's not funny, the theme song and background music are awful, and fits both sides of the coin in being one of those aged-down incarnations and Cartoon Network spin-offs / reboots. Also, why is Jude from 16 in this show?
Everything I